Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com. Today we're going to be looking at an absolutely gorgeous O-scale steam engine from Lionel, the Milwaukee Road S3 Northern 484. Lionel first offered the S3 in their 2010 Volume 2 catalog, and then they finally delivered it in November of 2011. As beautiful as this engine is, I originally didn't order one when it first came out. You know, probably 95% of the trains that I buy by pre-ordering them when the catalogs first come out. But when the 2010 Volume 2 Lionel catalog came out, I saw this engine and I thought it was nice, but there were other items in the catalog that I wanted as well, and so unfortunately I had to take a pass on it at the time. But when the engine was finally delivered late last year, I started getting a lot of emails from you guys asking me to do a review on this engine and telling me how great it was. And, you know, I always try to listen to suggestions. If I get one recommendation for an item, I'll kind of put it on the back burner and think, okay, maybe one day down the road I'll get this item and do a review on it. But when I get a whole bunch of recommendations, and I probably got about 20 or 30 emails from you guys about this one engine, that's when I start to think, okay, maybe I should check this out. So a couple months ago, I called up my local train store, Legacy Station, and I asked Brian over there if he still had any of these in stock, and he did. And so I went ahead and picked one up, and I'm really glad I did, because this is just an amazing engine, and it's quickly becoming one of my favorite steam engines in my collection. So before I go any further, I just want to thank all of you guys for recommending this engine, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be reviewing this engine right now. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start things off by giving you a brief history of the 261. This engine was built in 1944 by Alco for the Milwaukee Road, but it was only in revenue service for about 10 years until it was retired in 1954. When the engine was retired, instead of being scrapped, it was donated to the National Railroad Museum in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then over the years it's changed hands a few times and undergone some renovations and rebuilds and so forth. But today it's owned and operated by an organization known as the Friends of the 261. And it is still a working steam engine that is used to pull excursion trains. Now, at the moment, it's currently undergoing a 15-year recertification maintenance cycle, but once that's done, it'll be back on the rails pulling excursion trains. So this engine can still be seen and heard on the rails today. Now, the interesting thing about this model is that it's not based on the way the engine was in 1944, but rather it's based on how it looks today. Now, as I said, this Milwaukee Road engine is called an S3 Northern 484, but some of you who are new to the hobby may be sitting here saying, Eric, what in the world does S3 Northern 484 mean? Well, let me take a minute right now and explain it to you. Okay, so what does S3 mean? S3 is the class designation for the engine. The class is simply like a model name for the engine. It's the name that the railroad uses for that particular model of engine, and in this case, the Milwaukee Road called these engines S3s. Now, the terms Northern and 484 are sort of interconnected, so I'll explain what 484 means first and then get back to Northern. 484 indicates the wheel arrangement on the engine. This engine has 4 wheels up front, 8 drive wheels, and 4 wheels on the trailing truck, so therefore they designate this engine a 484. Now, the first American railroad to use the 484 wheel arrangement was the Northern Pacific Railway, and because of that, these engines got the nickname Northerns. And so even though this is a Milwaukee Road engine, it was referred to as a Northern, and most railroads referred to 484 engines as Northerns. Not all did, though. Some adopted their own names. The New York Central called them Niagaras, the Lackawanna called them Poconos, and the C&O called them Greenbriers, but in any case, all of those names refer to the 484 wheel arrangement. Okay, so now that you know what the name is all about, let's go ahead and talk about the engine itself. Both the engine and the tender feature sturdy die-cast metal construction. The engine is powered by one large flywheel motor, and you've got traction tires on the rear set of drivers for added pulling power. Inside the tender, you've got Lionel's Legacy command system as well as Legacy rail sounds. The engine can be controlled with Lionel's Legacy command system or with Lionel's classic TMCC command system, or you can run the engine conventionally if you choose to do so. But of course, to get the most out of this engine, you'll want to run it with Lionel's Legacy command system, and of course make sure you have the most recent version of the Legacy software loaded into your system. The engine and the tender have a combined weight of 11 pounds 11 ounces. From the tip of the engine to the end of the tender, it's about 27.5 inches, 28 inches if you count the coupler on the end of the tender. The engine has just under 2 pounds of pulling power at 1 pound 15 ounces, and the minimum recommended curve for this engine is 0.54. Up on the front of the engine, we've got a really nice looking pilot with hose detail right here, a coupler cut bar, and then there's a scale dummy coupler that folds out like that. If you want to double head the engine, you can swap out this scale coupler with this dummy O-gauge coupler that also comes with the engine. On the front of the boiler, we've got lots of nice detailing. Got a headlight right here and lighted number boards on each side. There's a little door that swings open like that, which is a nice touch. We've got operating marker lights here, a little swinging bell, and then a red Mars light right here. Here's a close-up of the running gear. They did a really great job with all of the details. It looks really nice, and it looks even nicer when the engine is in operation, and you'll see that in just a few minutes. Here's a look at the trailing truck and the firebox area. As you can see, it's very nicely detailed. On the firebox, they've got the variable ash pan glow effect. And the way that works is that when the engine is on, you'll get a red glow from down here in the ash pan. And then as you run the engine faster and faster, the glow from the ash pan will get more and more intense. On the sides of the engine, we've got safety tread on the walkways, legible builder's plates, nice separately applied handrails on each side of the engine, and lots of separately applied valves, pipes, and rods. Up on top, we've got a nice separately applied horn, a smokestack with an operating smoke in it, some nice rivet detail back here, nice hand-painted details here, and then some more detailed pipe work here. Let's talk about the horn for just a moment. You know, most steam engines have a steam whistle. They don't have a horn. But this engine has both a steam whistle and a horn. And that got me wondering if the engine was originally built with a horn back in 1944, or if the horn was added at a later date. And the reason I'm wondering that is because at one point in time, the insurance rates for the 261 became so high that the people that owned and operated the 261 decided to team up with Amtrak so that they could get the cheaper insurance rates that are allowed when you're part of Amtrak. But in order to team up with Amtrak, they had to make the engine Amtrak compliant, which meant they had to get the engine in compliance with Amtrak and government standards. And I'm wondering if part of that compliance meant adding that horn. I tried to find this out myself by looking at photos of the 261, but unfortunately, because the 261 is still a working steam engine, there are far more modern photos of the engine in excursion service than there are old photos of the 261 when it was originally with the Milwaukee Road. And even if you can find an old photo, it's hard to find one where you can clearly see this part of the engine. So if any of you guys are experts on the 261, I'd love to know if the engine was originally built with this horn or if it was added at a later date and why it was added. Okay, so moving back on the top of the engine, this piece here pops off to reveal the engine controls. You've got the run program switch, the Odyssey speed control on-off switch, the smoke unit on-off switch. This controls the smoke for the smokestack. And then the auxiliary smoke on-off switch. This controls the smoke for the cylinder steam effect, which is really cool. I'll show you what that's all about in a few minutes. And the piece is held on by magnets, so when you put it back on, it snaps in place like that. Moving back towards the rear of the engine, we've got lots of hand-painted separately applied details here, a separately applied dynamo generator right here, and then on the roof of the cab, we've got a little vent that slides open like that. The outside of the cab is also nicely done. We've got separately applied grab irons up here and a nice ladder down here. There are 3 windows, one over here, one right here, and one on the door. The main window moves like that, which is a nice touch. And the door opens up, and the door is on a spring, so when you let go, it'll automatically close like that. The inside of the cab is also very nice. There are 2 hand-painted crew figures. The back head is very nicely detailed with some hand-painted accents. When the engine is on, the interior of the cab is lighted. The gauges on the back head light up, and there's a red glow in the firebox. Here's a look at the underside of the engine. As I said earlier, you've got 2 traction tires back here, and then you've got 3 pickup rollers for good, solid electrical contact. Now, while I've got the engine turned over, I want to point out 2 of the hallmark features of this engine. The first being the cylinder steam effect, and the second being the self-adjusting drawbar. The cylinder steam effect is a feature that Lionel's been putting in some of their steam engines for the last few years. Now, this is not the first engine to feature the cylinder steam effect, but it's the first engine that I've reviewed that has it, and I gotta tell you, it's really cool. Okay, so what is the cylinder steam effect? Well, if you've ever seen a real steam engine in action, When they first start moving, a lot of times you'll see a jet of steam shooting out from the bottoms of the cylinders. What's happening there is that when the engine first starts moving, it's using what's called wet steam. It's steam that hasn't been superheated yet. It's not very dry. It contains a lot of water vapor. And some of that wet steam will condense back into water inside the cylinders. And you have to have a way to purge that water, or else you'll eventually damage the cylinders. So what the engineer does is he opens valves on the bottoms of the cylinders called cylinder cocks, and that releases the water from inside the cylinders. And when that happens, the water gets blown out as well as a whole bunch of steam. And that's what gives you that big plume of steam coming out of the cylinders when the engine first starts rolling, and it looks really cool. Well, Lionel has figured out a way to simulate that cylinder steam effect on these engines. What they've done is they've installed a second smoke unit called an auxiliary smoke unit, and that smoke unit is hooked up to these cylinders. And they've got two holes on the bottom of each cylinder. There's two right here, and there's two on the other side. And when the effect is activated, it blows smoke out of these holes, and you get the simulated cylinder steam effect on the engine, and it looks really, really cool. And then at the same time, there's a really good sound effect that goes along with it. So not only do you see the cylinder steam effect, but you also hear it, and it looks great. When you see this in a few minutes, if you haven't seen it before, you're going to be blown away, I promise you. The second hallmark feature of this engine is the self-adjusting drawbar system. This is a new feature from Lionel, and this is actually the first engine to have this feature. This is the self-adjusting drawbar mechanism right here, but to better illustrate what this is all about, let me first show you an engine that has a traditional drawbar. Okay, so here's the underside of the Lionel Vision Line 700E Hudson, which is a fantastic engine, by the way. And here's the drawbar, and the drawbar comes all the way down here and attaches right here to this screw. And it sort of hinges like that as the engine goes around curves. Well, the problem with this drawbar is the same problem that all O-gauge steam engine drawbars have had since the dawn of time. And that is that the drawbar has to be made a little bit longer than it would be on the prototype to allow the engine and the tender to successfully negotiate the tight turns that are typically associated with O-gauge layouts. If the tender is too close to the engine, when it goes around a tight turn, the engine and the tender will bind up and you'll have a derailment. And so to prevent that from happening, the manufacturers would make the drawbar a little bit longer than it would be on the prototype, so that there'd be a little more space between the engine and the tender, and they could go around that tight turn without any problems. But the trade-off is that it makes the engine look very unrealistic because you've got this huge gap between the engine and the tender. And as time has gone on and these engines have gotten more and more realistic and we've expected them to be more and more prototypical, that big gap has become sort of unacceptable. And so the struggle for the manufacturers has been to find a compromise on making the drawbar as short as possible, thereby pulling the tender in as realistically as possible, and yet still having the drawbar be long enough to negotiate reasonably tight turns on O-gauge layouts. So the new self-adjusting drawbar system is sort of the next evolutionary step in that ongoing struggle to get the gap between the engine and the tender as realistic as possible while still allowing the engine to negotiate tight turns. And it's based on a very simple principle. And that is that when you're on a straight section of track, you could actually pull the drawbar in a little closer because you're not on a curve, so there's no chance of the tender and the engine binding up. So you could shorten the drawbar and draw that tender in much closer to the engine and get a much more prototypical look. The time when you actually do need the extra length on the drawbar is when you're on a curve. That's when you need a little more distance between the engine and the tender so that you can get around that curve. So the ideal system would be one where when you're on a straightaway, the drawbar is pulled in close, and when you're on a curve, the drawbar automatically adjusts and lengthens itself to give you a little more space between the engine and the tender. If you could get something like that, you'd have a much more prototypical look. And that's exactly what the self-adjusting drawbar system is all about. So let's go back to the S3 and take a look. Okay, we're back on the S3, and here's that self-adjusting drawbar system. It works by way of these grooves right here, and then this spring mechanism right here. And here's the way it works when you're running the engine. When you're on a straightaway, and you don't need the extra length on the drawbar, it's on center here, and it's very close to the engine, and you get a nice prototypical distance between the engine and the tender. But when you go around a curve, and you do need that extra length on the drawbar, watch what happens. It pulls out, rides down that groove, and pulls that spring out, and you get a little extra length on that drawbar, which allows the engine and the tender to get around that curve. And then when you get back on the straightaway, the spring pulls it back to center, and you get that nice prototypical distance again. And it works the same when you go the other way, like that. Pretty cool. It's very simple, but very effective. Lionel did a great job on the tender that comes with the S3. It's got a beautiful elegance about it, so let's go ahead and take a closer look. The underside of the tender features nicely detailed truck side frames, as well as separately applied piping on both sides. On top of the tender, there are separately applied pipes and grab irons. There are 2 opening hatches, one right here and one right here. And under this one, you've got the volume control for the engine. And then back here, you've got a load of realistic coal. The front of the tender is also very well done with grab irons and pipes and so forth, and the doors right here are also very nicely detailed. When you get this engine, there'll be a piece packaged separately that looks like this. And it's a little skirt that is meant to attach right here to help bridge the gap between the tender and the engine to give you a more realistic look. I'm assuming that it's packaged separately because you probably can't use this if you're going to run the engine on really tight turns, but if you're running on wide turns like 072 or something, you can attach this and get a more realistic look. Now, the instructions for the engine do not mention this piece, and so I'm not sure of the exact way to install it. My first instinct was to just slip it down like this and have it on there like that. But I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be because it kind of wobbles around and it's not seated in there very firmly. So my guess is that it needs to be installed like a U, and it slides up under this lip here and then pops in like that. And it's much more firmly seated that way, and I think that's the way it's supposed to be on there. And as you can see, when it's attached to the tender, you get a much more realistic look in that gap between the tender and the engine. My favorite part of the tender is the back. It's got this beautiful spherical kind of shape to it. You've got lots of separately applied ladders and grab irons. There's a coupler cut bar down here. You've got a reverse light here and then an electro coupler down here. The Milwaukee Road logo on the tender is absolutely perfect, as you can see, and the tender also has legible builder's plates. Lastly, here's a look at the underside of the tender. There are 2 speakers right here, a couple add-on details right here, and then you've got a pickup roller on each truck. Okay, so now it's time to power the engine up and see it in action.
Dispatcher here. Do you copy? Over. I read you. Over. Please start her up and stand by for track orders. Roger that. Ready to move. Out.
Okay, our headlight is on, the lighted number board's right here, marker lights, and if you look right here you can see the blinking red Mars light. Because this model is based on the 261 Excursion engine, it actually has more than one whistle. You remember earlier I said it has a horn here and a whistle here? Well, because of that, it has 2 whistles and a horn. To toggle between the different whistles and the horn, you use the Aux 1 key on the Legacy remote. So here's the first whistle. Now I'm going to hit the Aux 1 key and it'll go to the horn. Pretty neat. And if I hit the Aux 1 key again, it'll go to the second whistle. The second whistle is more of a high-toned whistle, whereas the first one is more low-toned. Here's the first one again. So it's pretty neat. You have 2 whistles and 1 horn. Here's the bell. And of course that was the continuous ringing bell. If you want to just hit the bell once, you just tap the bell button on the Legacy remote like this. The engine also features several crew talk sequences. The dialogue is probably not the most realistic thing in the world, but it's kind of fun. Let's give it a listen.
Coupled up. Can I move? Over. Roger that. Take the green. Over. Copy that. I got a clear signal. Out.
Here's another one.
Dispatcher here, you are cleared outbound. Over. Copy that. I have a clear signal. Out.
One of the neat sound effects on the engine is the water tank fill effect. If you look at the Legacy remote, the top right button here is the water tank fill button. And if you press it, you'll get the sounds of the water tank being filled on the tender. So let's give it a try. Now, if you press the button and then hold it down, you'll get the sound of the water going into the tank until you let go of the button, and then when you let go of the button, you'll get a dialogue telling you that the water tank is full. So let's give it a try. I'm going to press it and then hold it for a few seconds. And it'll keep playing this water fill sound until I let go. And then watch what happens when I let go.
I want it full. Over. Roger that. Out.
Pretty neat. The last effect I want to show you before we move the engine out is the cylinder steam effect. Now, for this demonstration, I'm using this button right here on the remote. It's a picture of the engine with steam coming out from the sides, and that will trigger the cylinder steam effect anytime you want. But the other side of the effect is that when I start the engine moving in just a minute, it'll automatically trigger the cylinder steam effect, and it looks really cool when that happens. But let me show you the effect by itself. You just see the steam shooting out from the bottom of the cylinders? Let me do it again. Pretty neat. And you can hold the button down too if you want it to go for longer. Pretty cool. Okay, we're ready to roll it out. I've moved the engine back a little bit so that you can better see the cylinder steam effect once the engine starts rolling. Now, as I said earlier, once the engine starts moving, the cylinder steam effect will last for about 10 or 15 seconds or until the engine reaches a speed of 50 on the Legacy remote, whichever comes first. And in this case, the 10 or 15 seconds will come first. So let's go ahead and move it out. I'm going to activate sequence control so that the sounds will be automated. You do that by holding down the AUX1 key. Okay, that sound means that sequence control is activated. So let's go ahead and move it out and watch the cylinders for the cylinder steam effect. Okay, so that about wraps it up for this review. This is a great engine, it's packed full of cool features, and it's a lot of fun to run. Now, the retail price on this engine is just under $1,000, although if you go through a good Lionel dealer, you can probably get a little bit of a discount off that. And if you're looking for a good Lionel dealer, check out today's sponsor, which is Legacy Station. You can get to them on the web at www.legacystation.com or give them a call at 770-339-7780. One last thing I wanted to mention is that if you would like to run this engine with passenger cars, Lionel has manufactured 6 passenger cars that would go very nicely with this engine. They weren't sold with the engine, but they were offered on the same page as the engine in Lionel's 2010 Volume 2 catalog. They're high-quality aluminum passenger cars, and they're done in that beautiful orange and red Milwaukee Road Hiawatha scheme. There's a 4-pack and a 2-pack. The 4-pack has a model number of 6-25622, and it retails for just over $600. And the 2-pack has a model number of 6-25623, and it has a retail price of just over $300. I am planning on picking those up in the future if I can, and when I do, I will certainly do a review on them. But if you're interested, they are out there. Just look for them in the 2010 Volume 2 catalog or contact your Lionel dealer. Anyway, that's about it for now. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time.